Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ProgCast. I am your host, Gregg Bendian, as I am each Friday when we put new conversations with fascinating musicians out onto the airwaves. And I'm very happy to announce that we are now up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you want to just listen to the audio and not look at our beautiful faces smiling at you while we talk about musical concepts. But you can always see us here on the YouTube, and you can watch us have a good time talking about music history and some of the stuff that drives the artists that we're talking with, who are trying to do something new. We're trying to be engaged with forward-looking music endeavors, and that's certainly the case with my guest today. You know him from his work with the Aristocrats, with Guthrie Govan and Marco Minnemann, as well as his work with Joe Satriani, Steve Vai. He is the bass player in my favorite animated metal group, Dethklok.
Of the many.
And of course, a longtime collaborator, as I am, with the great Mike Keneally. So I'm just really thrilled to have him here today to chat about his new album and all kinds of cool stuff. This is Bryan Beller. Hi, Bryan.
Hey, hi, there's my hand. I can do it like that. If you move around in the background, it's all funny.
Yeah, I like how impermanent your physical form is.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time, buddy. You know, there's, besides Mike Keneally, we have in common that we are both Jersey boys. Originally.
Right. What town are you from originally?
I'm from Teaneck. So I'm like North Bergen County, and you're from Westfield?
I'm from Westfield, yeah. Heart of Union County.
Yes, I know it well.
Yeah. It was a very informative and intense place to grow up, and it's great to go back there and see my family who's all there still. My brother's gone over to the other side. He lives in Philadelphia, outside Philadelphia. But my parents still live in Springfield. My sister still lives in Westfield, so I go back there and see them. It's great. But I moved to a different place, as you can see.
Yeah.
This backdrop is actually a picture that I took that ended up on the cover of my double concept solo album that I put out last year called Scenes from the Flood. And it's in a rural part of California. It's basically kind of north of Los Angeles proper. Still in Los Angeles County, but it's northwest of the city, and it's a pretty beautiful place. I like it a lot.
You know, it's nice for musicians to be able to get away from it all, I think.
Well, if you're mostly touring, then it turns into a thing where, if you're a certain kind of personality and all that energy just kind of drains you, then you just want a place where you can go back and just kind of like have everything be really quiet and still. Because when you're on tour, you're just going from airport to airport, city to city, city center to city center, population to population center, concrete. You got to go where the people are because that's what makes the show work. So it's the opposite of getting out into nature and getting into quiet spaces and all the rest of that stuff. So I just felt like it was, and I've always been fascinated with rural areas. And anyway, even when I was in New Jersey, the funny thing, I used to like go up to the Watchung Reservation and just hang out there because it was the most rural place I could find within a bicycle's, distance. So when I got out to California and I realized that there were so many sparsely populated areas that were fairly close to the actual city, which is that's primarily a Western phenomenon, I think. The suburban sprawl in the Northeast kind of never really ends. You just go from town to town to town to town. Out here, you go far enough, there's just not anything there. So I like being on the edge of that, and that's where I live, and that's where I've called home.
Fantastic. I feel like I need that quiet and that peace and quiet and the green, and to be around nature and find it really conducive to creating. And I think in order to create, you have to be very relaxed. I'm not very good at creating when I'm all hyped up. So
yeah, and some people, it's the opposite. They really want to be in the city. They thrive on that energy, the constant neutrons and electrons banging against things. Really, you see me like negotiating my arms around here, trying to get the background behind. Yeah, I couldn't do that. And you know, it's funny because I grew up in New Jersey, and to me, New York City, that's a city. You know, it's like you go to the city, it should look like this. I remember when I went to other cities for the first time, I was like, "Where's the city? These couple blocks, that's it." You know, not to be a snob, but it was just my reference point was just Manhattan. So
very important.
Yeah, and you know, it's quite a buzz always going back to Manhattan, but like, you know, after a day, I'm just like, oh God, I gotta get out of here.
Now, did New York play a part in your musicality coming up the way it did for me? Because I know that being close to New York, and I'm really about 20 minutes from New York, I found that I could take lessons, I could go to shows, I could go to clubs, I could do so many things in the 70s and into the 80s. Did you have a similar experience?
No, it really didn't play much of a part at all. I was a, you know, hide in the bedroom guy mostly. I played in the band that was based in Parsippany with some guys there who, and there was a scene there. There were some guys that went on and did some stuff there, but in Westfield it was pretty barren, and it was very, you know, like cool kids were listening to like REM and Smiths and like stuff like that. You know, there's not cool stuff in there, but like, you know, when you're growing up and you're a muso and you're into prog and stuff like that, like there's nothing there for you. So I just stayed in my bedroom and I learned as much music as I could off records. I would go to New York City and I would go to 8th Street. I'd go to It's Only Rock and Roll and Revolver, get the Led Zeppelin, the Pink Floyd bootlegs. And then when Metallica was starting to become a thing, I did that too. But I never went to New York City to see shows, you know, I mean, like in clubs and stuff like that. I only went and saw big shows. Like I saw Pink Floyd on the Momentary Lapse of Reason Tour 86, the first tour without Roger Waters in Madison Square Garden. That was pretty amazing. And I saw Metallica at the Felt Forum in 1986 in the Master of Puppets tour. That was a great show. I'm glad I saw that. And there were a couple others, but I never got into the club scene. It just, you know, I wasn't hip enough. My one claim to fame in the New York City clubs is that it was in, I think it was 1990. I came back from a summer after I started going to Berklee College of Music, and I was walking around the city with a friend of mine. She was like, let's go see some live music. So we just walked into Mondo Cane just because we didn't know who was playing there. And we walked in and there was this band and they were super funky and really good. The singer was killing, and like the guitarist like had all these great rhythms and riffs, and the tone was amazing. The bass player was grooving and slapping his ass off. And it just was like, you know, song after song, and they could open up and play jams. And there were like 3 people watching them, like us and like one other person. You know, after the gig, I was like, "It's like, do you have anything?" And I bought their cassette. The name of the band was the Spin Doctors.
There you go.
It was. I swear to God, it was less than a year later. Suddenly, that video was on MTV.
That's interesting.
Other than that, not much. And then I ended up going to Berklee at College of Music in Boston, and that's where my musical world really started. And everything I got out of Berklee, and then I moved to LA 4 years later.
I'm kind of curious about teenage Bryan Beller, though. Like, what music are you getting into as a young man, discovering that you want to do music, and what's inspiring you? What's exciting you at that point?
The big bands for me when I was in high school were Pink Floyd for sure. You know, a lot of The Wall, a lot of Animals, a lot of Wish You Were Here. Dark Side, of course, but I got into the other big 3 more. Yes, it's a huge fan for me. Just
Chris Squire.
Oh yeah, but not really even because of Chris Squire, just because of the compositions. That was what it was about for me, was these grandiose compositions, like Close to the Edge and Siberian True. And I mean, I was in a Tales of Topographic Oceans. I was listening to Relayer when I was in high school. You know, I had the Yes album. I love that too. Yes is a huge band for me, compositionally. And Led Zeppelin, you know, just everything about groove and rock and power, you know, it was Led Zeppelin. And then I had a metal thing where I was into the big 4, you know, a little less so Anthrax, but Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Rain and Blood. It was a big thing when that came out in 86. So it was the metal bands and Black Sabbath, of course. But but then the big prog bands. So I was much more of a Yes and Pink Floyd guy than I was, say, a Genesis and Jethro Tull guy or Gentle Giant guy. And I think that has to do with the idea that I've always been a little bit more enamored with the compositional aspect than just the complexity for complexity's sake thing. And, you know, that doesn't, it really explained why I ended up getting into Frank Zappa when I got to Berklee, because there is some complexity for complexity's sake in Zappa's thing for sure. But that's what high school Bryan Beller was doing.
So, were you playing any progressive music in high school?
Well, only in my bedroom. You know, there wasn't anybody that I could play this stuff with. There was nobody in town. And you know, in New Jersey, you know, you go 2 towns over, you might as well be in another state, especially when you're growing up.
Yeah.
So Westfield was not happening for this kind of thing. So I really just played in the bedroom. And I finally found those kids in Parsippany, Dan and Mike Fadell is the name of these kids. And then, you know, the Tishy brothers came from there. Brian Tishy's a famous drummer now. He was from Morris Plains, I think. And his brother Mike, who's a really good guitarist. And there's another guitarist named John Skivick, who's from Convent Station, you know, which is right near there. And he went on to play with the Eels, the Wallflowers. We played a lot together at Berklee. But I didn't have really anybody that I could just sit around and like watch songs with. So I hid in my bedroom until I got to Berklee.
So what happened at Berklee?
Well, you know, I got to Berklee and I was like, oh my God, everybody's great here. I mean, not everybody, but I mean, like a lot of people were a lot better than I was, and that wasn't the experience that I was having in Westfield, New Jersey. So I just got really scared, and I really got into serious practicing. I was kind of a lazy practicer when I was in high school. I would learn stuff by ear just enough, you know, to get the technique together to do it. Once I got to Berklee, I was like, wow, this is the real deal. So I went and I really kind of hid in the shed for about a year and a half. And then I came out and, you know, I could slap and I could play stuff. And, you know, I was never the most technically advanced player, but I could play songs. And I started putting together my own shows at Berklee. And it was I wasn't really about trying to be the chopsiest player, but I wanted to show off a little bit, because you do that when you're a teenager and when you're in your early 20s as a musician. But I wanted to be a part of like a big funk rock band, you know, with horns and background vocalists. So I formed this thing. I called it Cosmic Chicken. And we had like, you know, varying lineups, you know, anywhere from like 10 to 20 pieces, you know. The biggest band we had was like 6 horns, 4 backing vocals, 2 guitars, 2 keyboards, guitar, percussion, drums, bass, you know, a couple lead vocalists. It was crazy. And we would do like the modern stuff we would do would be like Fishbone and Chili Peppers, but then we would also go back and do Stevie Wonder and stuff from the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and it was just kind of all over the place. The whole point was to put on a big presentation and to get people to come see the show, right? That's what that's what it's always about. That's what it's always been about. And that was one of the things that I learned when I was at Berklee, which is you can hide in your bedroom all you want and be really good, but at some point you got to go out and play, and at some point you got to let people know that you're playing. You got to get them to come to the show, and so that was something that I didn't realize I was paying close attention to, but I was paying close attention to while I was there, because I wasn't the kind of player that people were just plucking out of you know, a lineup and saying, I want you on my thing. There were a couple other bass players in my class who were flashier and, you know, more advanced technique, and that was a big thing then, especially in the late 80s and early 90s. So I kind of had to make my own party, and it was very instructive to do that, and see what worked and see what didn't.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to make it happen, you know, and sitting around definitely doesn't make it happen, but going out and playing music and playing for people and putting your vibration out there, that's definitely a big thing. And you ran into some important collaborators right around that time, didn't you?
Yeah, the most important one really was Joe Travers, who a lot of people in the Zappa world, of course, already know now. He is the Vaultmeister. He's the guy who's really the foremost authority on Frank Zappa's music and legacy in the world, living today. You know, I mean, you know, aside from Dweezil and Ahmed, who've seen stuff that only they would see, Joe Travers is really the guy. And it's funny because he was really devoted to that from the second that I met him. I've never met somebody who was so singularly devoted to something. You know, he was 19, 20, and he was a drummer. And you know, he could do the double kick, play shreddy things, but he really, really wanted to play Frank Zappa's music. He really wanted to be in Frank Zappa's band. And of course, the 1988 band had just finished touring, and there I was in 1989 and 90 and 91 and running into him. And he's the one who really kind of taught me about Frank Zappa's music. And so then he went to LA before I did, got the gig with Dweezil Zappa because Frank was already sick by then. And then when there was an opening, he got me an audition in Dweezil's band. And then I got the gig, and then I moved to LA. And suddenly I was one of those Zappa guys, even though I never played with Frank, and I would never claim to be on the level of those people. Just being associated with the Zappa name at all just kind of changes your life. And so suddenly it was like, who's this guy? And the weird thing about it is that it was the Zappa thing is kind of associated with people who are really advanced technical players. And so here I am, you know, I used to really love, you know, my thing is to play like rootsy R&B stuff and straight up rock, you know, Zeppelin, like the Stevie Wonder bass lines and Tower of Power and you know, Pink Floyd stuff, just really rootsy kind of stuff. Yes, can be kind of rootsy in R&B if you listen closely enough in certain things. But this really high-flying technical stuff that I was being thrown into, suddenly I was like, I had to kind of like go run back into the shed all over again because now I was being expected to perform at an even higher technical level. And I could kind of just reach it. So that was how it all started. And then ever since, I've been the guy who plays with fancy guitarists. That wasn't the plan. But, you know, man plans and God laughs, right?
Sure. In fact, I don't know how much people realize that we need bass players like Bryan Beller because, you know, flashy bass players, I guess, you know, I kind of also had my fill of that. And I'm, you know, over the years become more interested in musical bass players, I guess what I call functional bass players.
Well, I appreciate that. And I certainly don't want to sound like I'm slamming anybody because the thing about extended technique, especially on bass, is that if you can do it really, really well, it's just like the rarest of birds, right? I mean, you know, Victor Wooten is incredible. Nobody does what he does, and nobody really did it, you know. I mean, you can trace lineage, but nobody really did it like he did it until he did it. Billy Sheehan, I mean, God, you know, the three-finger thing and the amount of velocity and ferocity that he was bringing to stuff from a really early era, you know, I mean, early 80s, he was just going crazy on the instrument. So the thing is, and this is kind of a funny thing. So in the jazz fusion world, what I find just in terms of bassists is that if you want to get into extended technique, there's a lot of people who've done it. You know, I mean, people, you know, I mean, just look at John Patitucci, the guys who played with Chick Corea and Stanley Clarke, and I mean, you know, and that's just the beginning. Marcus Miller, and now you get more modern guys like Adrian Farad, who plays with John McLaughlin, and Matt Garrison, and I mean, and then you can go back further. Gary Willis has that. I mean, there's a lot of that going on. But it seems that the strange thing about bass is it seems that if you go to a certain point on your instrument and you want to kind of go to the ultimate level, you just kind of end up being a jazz guy. And it's not like that on guitar. And it's not like that on drums either. Like there's some like, you know, people who have like these really, really insane reps and it's really, they're just kind of rock and pop guys. But like with bass, it's like, if you're going to be the ultimate bass player, like you got to be able to like play all the Charlie Parker solos on bass. And it's like, I don't want to do that. You know, I'm sorry. I was never inspired to do that. I was at Berkeley and there was a point where I could see where there was going into jazz. I just wasn't inspired. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I think that there are very few extended technique players in rock and that are really rock players. There just aren't that many of them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
You know, I mean, you get like Billy Sheehan is kind of the North Star, you know, but, you know, so who else are we talking? Like, you know, Dave LaRue. I mean, like Dave LaRue can play jazz, even though he's known for playing kind of like the Dixie Dregs and Steve Morse and the Southern Rock Fusion thing. You know, you get into guys like Robert Trujillo, who's got a lot of chops. You know, he can slap and play and do a lot of different things. But I mean, like the list of guys that are quote unquote rock players who are just, this, oh my God, he can do anything, are total shredders, I think is actually quite short. Whereas the list of guys who, on the funk fusion jazz side, I mean, that list is really long. So, and I think that's kind of interesting because when you're playing rock bass, it kind of goes back to answering your very short statement and a long statement, which is that there's really only so much you can do in the backbeat idiom of rock, even in prog rock, even adventurous rock, on bass, before it just starts to become overbearing. And I even keep that in mind when I'm playing with the Aristocrats. And the whole point of the Aristocrats is to be over the top and kind of take the piss out of everything in a Zappa kind of musicality way and maybe play a little too much sometimes. But that's a trio. Like, I noticed the difference between the Aristocrats and Joe Satriani, just adding that second guitarist to the keyboard. And of course, Joe Satriani's compositions are much more kind of middle of the road than the Aristocrats stuff. But even if they weren't, just from a sonic standpoint, with the fourth member of the band on bass, you just don't want to do as much. You shouldn't anyway. That's the way I feel about it.
Well, it's like Frank would say, the issue becomes statistical density.
Right.
Yeah, and of course, the trio, it encourages everyone to be more orchestral and play more. And once you add a fourth or a fifth person, or if there's a singer, at the end of the day, there's like a critical mass, and you're talking about music. You're not talking about how do I feature my technique? How do I feature me? And I think that's what I appreciate, is that it's always about the music with you. In Keneally's stuff, it's always been about the music. And, let's face it, we have both had to learn Keneally tunes that were really challenging, but they're not impossible. And in a way, they're not even like super technical, but
that's the magic. Yeah. That's the magic of the Keneally gig, is that you can explore advanced musicality without having to, be able to play 16 notes at 200 beats per minute, because he's just generally not writing stuff like that. And that. And so it really kind of becomes more of a mental exercise. How can I bring songsmithing, which is such a big part of bass playing and drumming, of course, rhythm sections, transition, going from A to B, whatever the A and B are, A, B, C, D even, bringing those to life so that the transitions mean something, so that the song feels like it's telling a story. You feel like you've taken a journey and maybe come back to somewhere that you started, even if you took a roundabout way. Many of Keneally's songs do that. And to be able to bring really basic elements of songsmithing into a kind of a complex harmonic and rhythmic universe that he devises. And you have to think simply, even though you're in a complex context.
Yeah, you have to be focused.
So, Keneally's great for that, and Joe Satriani's great for that too. You really, if you're going to play a fill, you better make it count. In the middle of a song like "Flying in a Blue Dream," just any of his. There's so many classic songs that he has that are just melodies and a groove, and that's just it. Joe Satriani said something to me once I thought was really profound. He said, "I don't think it's a song unless I can play the melody on a piano." And I think that that's really like a big chunk of wisdom for guitarists in particular. Because guitar is a funny instrument. You can, do like kind of little bends and slides and all sorts of things. But in the end, what are the notes? Like, what are they? And I got what he was saying. It's like, if it can't be reduced to the actual, here's a note, here's a note, here's a note, here's a note, for this duration, for that duration, for that duration, then it's not really a melody. It's kind of something else. And that's just one approach. It's not the only approach. I mean, listen to a band like Animals as Leaders, and just the very first song on the very first album. Like, is that Tempting Time?
Mm-hmm.
You start listening to it, and that. I mean, you're thinking, oh wow, it starts with the solo, and then you realize he does it again, and you're like, holy shit, that's the melody.
Yeah, but it's funny you jump on that part. The thing that impressed me when I first heard that was you know, and so they've got this cross rhythmic thing, and it grooves like a motherfucker. So you're like, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah.
And then of course, you know, you got that sort of post non-brewed condiment from Holdsworth where, you know, oh, is that he's starting with a solo? Oh no, that's the melody because he's going to play it again. And so yeah, but it's an incredible thrill. And Tosin's so great, and you know, those compositions are really cool. I remember meeting him when they first came around, and he was really into Meshuggah, and I found that interesting.
Well, you know, there's metal before Meshuggah and there's metal after, and there's just no getting around that. I mean, I remember one of my great friends, Mike Mesker, who does the artwork for a lot of the Steve Vai and Frank Zappa projects, incredible graphic designer. He's the one who turned me on Animals as leader. He's like, listen to this. This is the next thing. And that was like 2005, 2006. It never occurred to me, listening to them, that they would become kind of the most influential metal muso band of the last 15 years. And I think in a lot of ways they have been. Well, so many modern bands, the younger bands like Covet and Chon and Periphery and not Periphery and Polyphia. Just there's so many of these younger acts out there who have taken that kind of like just the clean part of their arpeggios, the melodies. Plini has taken a lot from them, and kind of turned it into a style all its own, which is great. But I remember in 1995 or 6 when, do you know Rich Pike?
I do, yeah.
Rich Pike, we're over his place, and he used to work for Steve Vai, and he had an early internet radio show, and it was called Nun Radio, and he's like, you have to listen to this. I'm like, I was into metal. I like, you know, Metallica and Megadeth and all the big four, the thrash metal bands and Pantera and everything, and he just put on Future Breed Machine, and I just remember being like, what is this? Like,
well, I love that.
The whole time I was just like, you know, on like on edge. That just you know, the and the thing is, now it doesn't even sound dated at all. Now you go back and listen to it, and you're just like, that is completely fierce, and it's 25 years ago. I ended up actually, I used to write for Bass Player magazine, and I interviewed Peter Norden, who was the original bass player from Meshuggah, and he's the one who played the track, and he told me how they did it. He said it was like a very cerebral thing, that they had long meetings about like the concept of the band and the concept of these songs and how it would work, and they just started playing. They wrote some riffs, and he said they would just start playing them really slow, like, you know, like they would be like, I think the main riff in that song is like 1, 2, 3, 4, right?
Right.
And he said they would rehearse it like 1, 2, and like a long time.
And then, what do we know? That
yeah, right.
When you can feel it slow, you can feel it fast, and you can't go. You know, you say, "Oh, I can't play it slow. I can only play it fast." It's like, fuck that.
Oh yeah.
You got to sit in it. If you can't sit in it slow, you're not going to sit in it fast.
Yeah, yeah. It's really hard, and so, you know, it's just
that's something I wanted to talk about, was your relationship with all the bass players when you were doing those really important interviews, because you covered so much ground, and so you were able to get really at the foundation of a lot of bands that way. No,
it was really great. I mean, like, you know, I wrote for Bass Player magazine at first as kind of a lark. Like, I used to have this blog called The Life of Bryan, and I would just write, you know, long snarky shit, and they were like, do that for us. I'm like, sure. Back page, they're like, yeah, sure. I'm like, yes. And so I did that. Like, I have 18 columns that were just totally free form, you know, on whatever the hell I felt like writing about. I'm sure I would have got something out of the way that the Zoom background is behaving right now. It would have been at least 800 words. And I did that, and I felt like that after a year and a half or maybe like 2 years really. I kind of exhausted that format. And then I took a break, and then because I was working for an amplifier company, it was a bit of a conflict of interest. And then once I quit that, I went back to writing for them, and I started doing feature interviews and transcriptions and interviews with the people who did the original playing. And it was such an educational experience. I mean, a couple of the standouts were like Jonas Hellborg. That was a really deep interview. I remember interviewing Chris Wolstenholme from Muse. That was a cover story. And I was a big fan of what he was up to, creating so much sonic space, filling out that trio just massively. Justin Chancellor from Tool, that was a good one. Alex Webster from Cannibal Corpse, that guy's got a lot going on. Not everybody knows that. Oh God, there are just so many. I mean, I interviewed I'm Patitucci, and I did Billy Sheehan, and I did talk to Victor a little bit. I never did a big thing on Victor, but I did a little thing on him. I just so many players. And I learned so much, and I had to sit there and play it, even though sometimes I couldn't really play this stuff. I did Arthur Barrow once. We did the St. Alfonso's melody as the monthly transcription. I could never play that thing up to tempo. I could play it. I remember I had it at about 65, 70%. Not even close. It was such a bitch. But that's the thing, is I wanted to be able to I wanted to feel my hands to be able to get inside what they were doing.
Right.
And then once I could understand what it was that they were doing on the instrument, I could explain it to the reader and be like, yeah, this is cool, this jump is weird. You have to watch your right hand over here, your left hand, you got two options, both of them are bad, to try and get around this thing, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't always technical. Sometimes it was just groove. But it was a lot of really, really fun stuff. And I definitely am a more well-rounded bass player and musician for having had the opportunity to do that.
Well, and they were lucky to have you, because when it's colleague to colleague, it's different than when it's, journalist to artist. And they must have felt very comfortable speaking with you and got a lot out of it.
Oh, I'll tell you one that was super interesting, but also kind of challenging, was Edgar Meyer. Have you ever talked to him?
No, but I admire his work greatly.
He's an absolute genius. He won the MacArthur Grant. Come on, But he's a very intense guy. And I was, at his house, and I saw his home studio, and it was just really intense, really intense.
How?
Oh, just no. Some people, are kind of easygoing in nature, and they and it helps the flow of an interview. But he was into kind of challenging the premise of questions, which was just listen, have you ever considered that the way that you're thinking about this is all kind of, you're just missing this big thing? And it was kind of like that over and over and over again. And a lot of the times I think that's where genius comes from. But I was just a kid, so I was just kind of scared.
Yeah, I know. But it's important to obviously doing it with the podcast as I am, and interviewing the musicians I've interviewed for Yale, you get this idea of there's no one way. And you see all the different processes that people go through to get what you thought would be, something totally different. Well, that's how you did it. Oh, here's one, interviewing any of the free jazz pioneers. So what did you guys talk about when you were coming up with unit structures, say? We didn't talk about it. So just finding out what's happening on the ground. And you were also interviewing a lot of these guys near the beginnings of their coming out to musical world, right?
Not necessarily. The way that Bass Player Magazine worked is, there was a category for people who were kind of up and comers, and I interviewed some of those people sometimes, but more often than not, I was talking to fairly established people, which was cool also. And some of them were more well known than others. Maybe we all know who Michael Rhodes is, but that's not necessarily a name that jumps off the tongue of every young player. It's like, oh yeah, he's Cat, but he's one of the biggest guys in Nashville, and not just the Nashville stuff. But what was interesting also was realizing that a lot of times these interviews, the the battlefield wasn't necessarily prepared on their behalf for them to get the thing out that they wanted to say. It was just like, let's go talk to this person. And the publicist would arrange it, and then I would talk to them, and we just like be sometimes random, sometimes cool, sometimes really focused. And, you know, now we're getting back to like when I was talking about the thing where I was back in Berkeley, which is like you have to tell people what you're up to. So when I was getting ready to publicize my first solo album, since the time I wrote for Bass Player magazine, because the last time I put out a studio solo album before this most recent one was 2008, and that's when I was writing for them. 11 years ago, I learned a lot about the kinds of submissions and press release and packages and messaging that worked to reinforce what it was they were trying to say about the art that they were trying to get people to listen to. You know, where is it publicity and where is it commerce and where is it art? The answer is kind of yes. You know, even Frank Zappa, even in the latest documentary movie, you know, you would look at him as somebody who was as anti-commercial, quote unquote, as you could imagine. But in truth, he was actually very much into dollars and cents. And he said the whole point is to create something and then get people to buy it. That's it. So, you know, when I sat down to work on this double concept album, which is called Scenes from the Flood, that came out last year, I put myself through an exercise, and I advise anyone who asks me about putting together, kind of reaching out for publicity, what to do. I wrote what I wanted to say about it with no limit. Just wrote pages and pages. You know, this is what this album's about. This is what the song's about. I was thinking about this, and this is the story.
Well, why don't you jump in a little bit there? Because when you say concept album, I say yeah. So I'm really curious. What was the concept of the album for you?
Well, I'll tell you. Let me finish the little bit here.
Sorry, go ahead.
And it'll make it easier to explain the concept, because otherwise it'll end up going on forever. Once I was done with that, or once you're done with that, then okay, you've done it in 4 pages. Congratulations. Now do it in 1 page. So now I have to condense it down to like 3 paragraphs. Now that means I got to talk about what it means, where it was recorded, who plays on it, you know, what's the message of the album, you know, what's the vibe, what's the style. That's got to be on 1 page. Great. I've done it on 1 page. Now give it to me in 1 paragraph. Now give it to me in 1 sentence. Now give it to me in 10 words. And that is a really, really difficult exercise, because it really forces you to boil down to just key words about, you know, you've got a few words that are going to kind of ricochet throughout your entire press universe. And if you do it right, then the shortest bio and the longest bio all speak together in one voice about the thing that you're trying to say. So, Scenes from the Flood. What I wanted to do was I wanted to write a grandiose double concept album, you know, a throwback, like, you know, like albums like The Wall, yes, Pink Floyd The Wall, and yes, Tales from Topographic Oceans, and tell a story about, in one word, disillusionment. About, and then if you want to expand on it a little bit, I would say it's about human nature's desire to aspire and plan, and then reality events occur. Often for everybody, they have this one thing that happens. It's a life event that occurs. It's like nothing's really the same after that. How does a human being react to that? How does the world react to the human being's reaction to that? Is life truly intentional, or is it capricious? And so it's a bit of a dark album. And I tell the story that there's a protagonist in the album, and he goes through a series of events, and one by one, the illusions fall. It starts out in a very, very optimistic place. And as the album goes on, there are more and more events, and eventually there's a song called The Storm, which is halfway through. And you can see that the album cover essentially evokes that thing that is coming. It starts off in this very kind of optimistic, very aspirational, intentional place, and then life happens. And then what do you do about it? Do you go back to your original way of thinking, or do you have to come up with something? You have to let go of that concept. That's what the album's about. And so I wanted to be able to tell the story with a lot of different tonalities and timbres of people, And so I ended up reaching out to the people that I was playing with at the time, which were, I was doing a G3 tour. I realized that Joe Satriani would be great for like one of the opening tracks, a really optimistic major tonality rocker. I don't know if anybody does that instrumental world like Joe Satriani. He just has a great way of feeling and phrasing those kinds of major melodies. Not that he can't get dark and be sad and be bluesy, but he does do that thing really well, the upfront. And so he was on that. And then, of course, there's this 9-minute progressive epic where the whole story comes to a climax on side 4, if you're speaking in vinyl sides. And, you've got 80 minutes of music preceding it. You've got one guitar solo that's going to have to essentially exceed them all. And, who do you go to? Who has that kind of majesty? Well, only John Petrucci, right? So he did one of those for me. And then after that, there's an ending ballad even after that. Who's, got enough juice to be able to kind of carry the whole album home after this massive journey? Well, Guthrie Govan is an amazing guitarist, but that sort of thing. He's the incredible kind of 6/8 slow swing, sad, winsome ballad thing. His tone on that and his feel on that is great. Joe Travers is on a lot of the straight rockers on drums. Gene Hoglan, incredible metal drummer, is on a couple of the really, really haul-ass metal tunes.
Gene's ridiculous.
I know.
Oh,
Keneally is Mike Keneally's on it. He plays metal guitar on the song that Coleman's on, but also acoustic guitar on the ending ballad. Just a little bit of extra range there. And and then there's a couple string players. There's live strings. I played all the bass. I played most of the keyboards, and then there's a lot of other guitarists in there too. A couple amazing young guitarists. Neely Brosh, amazing young kind of rock instrumental fusion guitarist, tackled one of the hardest parts on the album. Griff Peters and Rick Masalem, who were from Mike Keneally's band, and they had really, really cool parts. Jamie Kime from the original Zappa Plays Zappa band has a really key solo. I could go on and on. Ray Hearn from Haken is the drummer for a couple songs, so we're getting deep into the kind of prog thing. It felt like after 10 years, I really wanted to say something big, and make a statement that would honor, as an homage as much as anything else, to the big records that we loved and growing up with, the double concept albums. Because Thick as a Brick is almost a perfect concept album, right? The themes that interweave throughout, the way the movements keep going, but it's just a single album. So I really wanted to emulate a double concept album, like The Wall. There are a lot of parallels. I could talk for 2 hours about that. But also like Tales from Topographic Oceans, just the gigantic scope of the thing.
I'm curious. You've mentioned Tales from Topographic Ocean several times, and I have to say it's a huge one for me as well as a body of work. Now, it's also been maligned to a certain extent. I don't know why, because I don't agree with what I hear. But why don't you tell me what you think is so great about it, and how it could inspire you to do a double concept workout?
Well, this is really, really. I'm so glad you asked this. I think that most of Yes's best writing is on Fragile, Close to the Edge, Yes album Relay. I don't think that Tales from Topographic Oceans has their best writing. But the thing that they were going for was so big. And they almost, so this is the thing. I actually consider the album a failure. And I say that as a fan of the band and as a fan of the album. There's a lot of great themes in there. The first 2 songs are essentially mirrors of each other. They're kind of like they're like Close to the Edge again, and then Close to the Edge again. It's a 20-minute song with the movements that, go high and then low and then high and then it rewinds and, wraps back around and then it ends. And they're cool, but especially because the first one has a couple of themes that come back later in the fourth one. That weird guitar melody that Steve Howe does.
And go down.
The Kinds of God.
Go down.
Right, exactly. Now, the side 3 and 4 are much more interesting to me. The Ancient and Ritual. Those are super adventurous compositions.
Well, the slide, the steel guitar forever. What a commitment to that idea.
And not only that, but the rhythmic aspect of the of the Ancient, that and then the way the melody floats over it and everything. It was the first time they ever really tried something like that. And then, of course, the second half of the song is all acoustic. And then finally, Ritual. And, they almost did it. Like, I feel like the first half of Ritual honors the rest of the album and kind of tying up a double concept album about as well as anyone could have written it. And up until the point where the song suddenly stops and then breaks down to that drum percussion solo thing, then it's just like, it didn't need that. It was that the bass solo section in the 5, and then the and then the guitar solo that follows that with that crazy series of changes.
I love that guitar solo.
Yeah, that's goosebumps, man. That stuff's all great. And then it goes into that drum thing, and I know that they were trying to tell a story in 4 parts with the different instruments and all the rest of that stuff, but then it comes back, and it does the original theme again. And then they tried to kind of wrap it up in this ending series of kind of slow winding chords with a one final guitar solo. And then there's this climactic chord that just kind of dissolves into this minor thing.
Yeah.
And then it's over. I remember the first time I heard it, I was just like, what was that? And that's only been reinforced to me over time. So I don't want to spend too long on this, but I already have. And I will say that on Scenes from the Flood, this is like super arrogant to say, but I really did intentionalize this. This is minute 85 of an 88-minute album, the end of the second to last track, which is the Climactic Ballot, because the last song is an epilogue. The last minute and a half of that is my attempt to right the wrong that I feel like the very end of Topographic Oceans didn't really get.
It's so hard to end on a big thing. I mean, they made a choice, and we all make that choice when we do the expanded idea. Make that ending mean something. Make that ending land. It's not so easy.
They subverted it. They tried to.
They tried to subvert it, I think.
They tried to subvert it, and it didn't quite work. I get it. Like, the first 2 sides are essentially close to the edge again. Like I said, there's the big climactic major ending after 20 minutes. Okay. So then they were like, no, we're not going to do that this time.
So what was your solution?
My solution was just, I hope, is a more cohesive series of harmonic climactic chords, and then a more satisfying subversion of the format, because my album does overtly attempt to subvert the ending of a double concept album format. It doesn't end the way that you think it's going to. And that's the thing that I liked about Topographic Oceans, is that I got that they were trying to do that. But I mean, we all know, we've all read the stories about how difficult it was when they were making that album. They weren't really operating as a cohesive unit, and it kind of shows. Fortunately, I didn't have to answer to anybody but me. So that was the best I could do to kind of like give it the sense of grandeur that the end of The Wall had, with the whole thing leading up to that final explosion, and then also the Tales from Topographic Oceans thing, where it just doesn't end harmonically the way that you think it will. And what are the implications of that for the story of the album? Where does it leave you as a listener when it's over? So there's my big, long, overstuffed take on Tales from Topographic Oceans.
But they got it right on Relayer.
They sure did, man. And what an adventurous album. Gates of Delirium is one of my favorite compositions ever. Ever.
I hope so.
I mean, just the structure of it. I love how they were able to create a 20-minute composition without using the close to the edge formula. They really did kind of reinvent it. They did with the 3-movement thing, with the song as the kind of first third, and then this massive Odyssey section, the battle scene in the second third, and then Soon, which is really its own song in a lot of ways, the third song, except for the very end of Soon, which ties back to the first couple of things, and then the way that it ends is just absolutely gorgeous. That is really something. That's a landmark piece of work. And Sound Chaser is just like, nothing's ever been written like that. I performed that song with a band at Berkeley just to get the vocals right on that. And in the verses, it's just like, fuck, it's really hard.
Yeah. The vocal arranging, just for a second, we should say, vocal arranging, if you really are interested in vocal arranging success stories in prog rock, you look at the Genesis, the Yes book, and you will see that, Squire is the vocal arranger on, I'd say 9/10 of that stuff.
Yeah.
That's serious.
It is really great when you hear the way the inner harmonies are shifting up and down.
Well, he's the bottom and the top of everything.
Yeah.
So he's very concerned about contours.
Yeah. I mean, like, I remember writing this out in traditional harmony, the faster moments, ways that change the sound, all that stuff. Move to counterbalance that, I'm not going to sing it, but I mean, like, if you listen to the high part, listen to the low part, try and listen to the middle part. The middle part is going up and down half steps and whole steps to try and carry the way that the majors and minors are. And it is just a bitch.
I know.
And then To Be Over is a really, really beautiful song.
Yes, and that should be, I think, considered also a masterpiece by them.
Yeah. It really is. It's an absolutely gorgeous song. I would have loved to have heard it maybe recorded and engineered slightly differently. It's a little kind of thin and bright, but it is what it is, and it's a great album. And I do consider that album a success, whereas Topographic Oceans is kind of a magnificent failure.
Have you heard the live recordings of Topographic and Relayer material? Because they really knock it out of the park.
I have heard live Relayers. I have not heard too much live Topographic Oceans. Oh yeah, well I've heard the Ritual version of Ritual on Yes shows.
Well, here's the thing, and I think you'll get a kick out of this. When Jean-Luc Ponty was touring with John Anderson a few years back, I got the chance to hang out with Anderson. And this is what I said to him. John, in 1974, you guys went out and you did the full Close to the Edge album, took an intermission and did the 4 movements from Tales from Topographic Oceans, left the stage, came back, played Roundabout Goodnight. I said, are you fucking kidding me? He goes, oh, well, nobody told us we couldn't do it.
It's an incredible commitment to long form rehearsal. And the thing, but you know this though, and this is the thing that I wish more musicians could learn and know and feel. There are certain things that happen to a piece of music when you play them on a tour. And it's not even necessarily about, oh, we're on tour. It's just that you played it in 20, 30, 40, 50 different venues in like rapid succession.
It's bulletproof.
There are things that you learn what works and what doesn't work, and there are little evolutions and all the rest of that stuff. And it's amazing what can become normalized and regular when you commit your life, essentially, to a couple months to just doing nothing but putting on this show. And yeah, if you're starting from scratch and you have to learn the entire Close to the Edge album, the entire Topographic Oceans album, and Roundabout, and then you got to go out there and play it in 2 weeks, you're fucked. But if you've had a lifetime of playing with some of the same guys and just playing the material over and over and over and over again, a lot of good things come from that. And, it's funny with the Aristocrats, that's pretty technically and also form-wise demanding stuff. And when I haven't played it in a while and I go back and I listen to a live recording or something like that, I go, oh my God, how did I do that?
Yeah.
But once you get over the hill on that stuff it's funny how quickly it does snap back when you go back and go, okay, I got to relearn this thing. And then suddenly you're, after the first or second time your hands go, oh, right, and all the muscle memory and the mental memory kicks in and just happens. And that doesn't really happen unless you get a chance to tour.
That's right. Because it's the 10th time or it's the 12th time.
It's the 10th time. It is 10 times. I agree with that.
So, you see Yes going out with Alan White to play the Close to the Edge material for the first time live. And that's where arranging is taking place on stage. So I would recommend that to you also. There's 4 shows from 72. It's a box set. Fucking Squire. Sometimes he's direct, so you hear like all these little details of what he's doing, and he never misses anything. And there's a time where he bails on a vocal because he's not sure. You can tell he forgot what the next lyric was going to be, and he bails on it rather than say it wrong. I mean, there's interesting stuff like that.
Yeah.
I could go on, but is your concept album going to be performed live?
Well, that was part of the plan. I mean, COVID fucked up so much shit, right? Pardon my French, but I had a year and a half of touring lined up. This was going back to the second half of last year. It started the summer 2019. It's going to be a full Aristocrats cycle for our latest album, You Know What. We did all North America. We did both legs of Europe. The second leg ended on March 6th. I mean, I was in Italy from February 12 to 23. I mean, it was, it was happening all around us. It was crazy.
So what did you notice?
Oh, everybody was talking about it already when we were there. Like, you know, when we arrived in 13th and 14th, the first couple shows were in the north, and then we went down south. And the plan was to come back up north to Torino and Montebelluna, which is way north, to finish the run. And so when we went down south, we were already hearing in the north that cases were growing and what is going on and da-da-da-da-da-da. And then when we started working our way back up north, we were in, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this, but
No.
we were working back up north, and there were 2 shows left, and those 2 shows were the dates, the 23rd and the 24th. They were the first cancellations in the entire West, like shutdowns in the entire Western world. It was Northern Italy on February 23, pretty sure. And we just got the hell out of there. Went to Austria, Russia, Ireland, UK, and finished the run. And so that was it. The Aristocrats had South America and Asia for the rest of the year. That got blown out. And then I was supposed to start Joe Satriani Europe for his tour for the Shape-Shifting album. That was supposed to start in April in Europe. That got wiped out. He had a South America thing for the summer. That got wiped out. He had a North America thing that's supposed to be happening right now. That got wiped out. So everything got pushed back into 2021. And my original plan was to finish 2020 with both of those world tours kind of, you know, in the books, which would have been a very good year and a half for me, because you know how it is when you're touring, it's cyclical. You can't take too many touring acts because you got to be able to commit to large chunks of time. So I figured Aristocrats and Joe Satriani was a good way to go. And then it all got wiped off the calendar all at once. So when the calendar resumes, I'm going to jump back on with Joe and then finish that Aristocrats. So we'll probably add stuff on the back end of it. We haven't planned it yet, but we will. And so any opportunity that I would have had to do my own solo tour, put that together, has now been pushed way off. You know, I mean, we're talking 2023 probably, you know, and there were always going to be challenges about doing it, because I want to do it like, I just don't want to walk on stage with a bunch of musicians and just play this music. First of all, you couldn't do it with less than 60 musicians anyway, and that's with tracks. Some of these arrangements are just huge. I also wanted to feel like a concept album show, like The Wall. And you know, I don't have Roger Waters' bank account, but I would like to put on a show that has a video accompaniment and a real show.
Yeah.
And so that's going to take some planning. And I had a list of things that I was all going to work on while I was on the road in 2020 with these other acts. And of course, it all got completely blown out. So, you know, now we're ending where we started, which is man plans and God laughs, right?
And
I mean, the album is what happened to the album's live plans.
Indeed, but our audience should know that you did some really slick videos for some of the songs on this album. Tell me about that.
Oh well, thanks for bringing that up. There are three videos. The first one is very minimalist, actually, for the song "The Storm," which is the embodiment of, you know, the life event that after which things will never be the same. And it's just, you can look at it on YouTube. It's just a very, very slow forming graphic image of a kind of a digital storm cloud, and some things happen to it. I think it's cool, but it's definitely minimalist. Then there's a video for Volunteer State, which is that very up song that kind of starts the whole journey. And it's a live action video, which was shot, you know, in a bunch of locations in California. And it's kind of an old school video. It's like a video that you might have seen on MTV, like in the 80s or 90s or something like that. And then there was for these 2 other songs, these more kind of shorter, faster, quicker paced songs called A Quickening and Steiner and Ellipses, which is the story kind of accelerating and a malevolent force showing up. I wanted to have a video that was kind of paced at the speed of now. You know, like everything, you see these, you know, TikTok videos and modern videos, and there's so many cuts and everything's happening so fast. You know, we're you know, I'm 49 years old, you know, I'm used to it, but video definitely moves faster than the way that I'm used to thinking of it. And so I wanted to have something that moved that fast, also was a satire and kind of a commentary on our completely digital and digitized universe that we're in because of COVID, but not just because of COVID. We're always on social media, we're artists, we're creating content, and people are commenting on it, and then we're reading the comments and reacting, and it turns into this big meta thing. So that video, basically, I dressed up as 4 different characters who are all content creators. They put their content online. A bunch of random comments show up on the screen, basically cutting on them. And then the characters go back to their own social media accounts and read the negative comments that were left for them. And then, of course, we're experiencing this in the real world on social media, commenting on these commenters, commenting on these people. It just starts to turn into this very being John Malkovich thing. And then finally, there's a little bit of a plot twist in the end. Someone kind of tries to break out of the whole thing. So that video was edited by Joe Satriani's son, ZZ, who's actually a very, very talented filmographer and editor, and he's also under the age of 30. And so he looks at video, having grown up on a much faster paced world than Gen X or me. And I wanted someone who could bring the speed and feel of that kind of thing into the video, and I think he did a really, really great job of it. So those are all on my YouTube page.
Those you should see, folks, because the one that Bryan's describing with the social media thing moves so incredibly beautifully against the music, and it's just a very innovative piece, and I was really knocked out by it. I know you will be too.
It was a lot of work. We shot for months, weekends. I got to tell you, I don't know how like the Hollywood film people do it. I mean, like, you know, the amount of work that goes into just creating something that looks good with just a few seconds is mind-numbing. And, you know, thinking about the way that they're doing this on a massive scale, I don't care, you know, if it's CGI or not. You still got to have real people in there doing it. And you still got to create these worlds. And it takes a lot of work. I was excited to do it because I came up with something that I wanted to present in this era as a video, not just a 4 squares Brady Bunch, you know, live shot video. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because I think that people need music, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I felt good about presenting that, and I felt good about working on it. But when I was done, I was just like, oh my God, I am so happy to be back to just working on audio. He says on the Zoom call.
No, listen, I believe in the visual, and obviously, but I care what the visuals are for the sounds that I'm listening to. We stared at those gatefold album covers for hours and hours at a time for a reason.
Yeah.
And, you're bringing that back. I love that you did purple vinyl.
Yeah. And it's funny because you started this whole thing by saying that, it was all very forward looking, but the truth is that this particular work is not really forward looking. It's really a throwback. But for people who aren't familiar with the format, the concept, that's a whole different thing. And I know that the attention spans of younger listeners are not what it used to be, but I am hopeful, even though people's listening habits have changed. We see a lot of young people at Aristocrats shows, and they're hungry for good stuff. So in the end, you got to be who you are. I think that when you're an artist, it doesn't work to try and do it any other way. So, even if a double album is what you're into and everybody's putting out singles and streaming on Spotify, whatever, there's nothing you can do about that. You just have to make the work and the art that you believe in, that you're infused with, because you listen to, you are what you eat. You listen to this stuff when you grew up, the double folds, the progressive stuff, and all the rest of that stuff. If you listen to that stuff and then suddenly try and beat Mumford & Sons, it's going to be weird.
No, I tell people all the time, I tell my son, look, this is my damage. It's like I was 13 going to see Emerson, Lake and Palmer at Madison Square Garden with a full orchestra. So I'm fucked. It's, once you live that, and it's so vivid to this moment, Bryan. I can still picture, seeing Yes for going for the one and two.
You're so lucky. So you, when was that the first tour that you saw going for the one?
Yeah, I missed Relayer and the solo.
Oh, well, the first one I saw was Big Generator.
Which was a great tour, by the way.
Yeah, I liked it, but of course I wanted to hear more of the mid-'70s stuff, and they didn't do it. So,
I'll tell you all about it sometime, because those are, very vivid memories. and they were a chamber ensemble, as were a lot of those groups. You know, there's a sense of chamber in Mahavishnu. There's a sense
Yeah.
of chamber in, you know, Return to Forever. There's a sense of a chamber thing in Gentle Giant. And so, you know, you look at what were we learning when we were listening to those cats? Well, one thing we were learning is how to play as a band. Like, you know, you talk about, oh, the guitar solos, other, you know, yeah, I get that. But like, we were learning mechanics. And I say this to all those guys, like, we were listening to your music on the radio and we were doing ear training. You know?
Yeah, and not only that, but you know, the thing about chamber influenced, classically influenced progressive rock, like Yes, is that your part is just one of an interlocking piece. If you start fucking with it or you don't pay attention to it, you know, the whole composition can fall apart very quickly. So, you know, that kind of focus and presence is a big part of what makes it all work.
Man, Bryan, it's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm just such an admirer of your work. I have been since, you know, we first showed up together. I don't know if you remember, but we shared the stage in May of 2001 at the Bottom Line on the dancing tour where Mahavishnu Project doubled with Beer for Dolphins.
I do remember that. I remember it very, very well. Yeah, you're killing on that stuff. I mean, like you know, there's a lot going on and all that. And there's so many great players in our world, and I hope that when live music resumes, that people will appreciate that. That you know, there's just so much good stuff to see out there. Don't waste an opportunity to go see it once it comes back.
You know, I never did, and that's why I feel okay. Like, I went to everything. I saw, you know, Frank New York premiere of Perfect Stranger at Juilliard, and Frank was there. And that's when I met Frank and talked to him about Ferez, and I've told that story on the podcast, so I won't tell it again. But, you know, just being able to have the air moving in your face from the vibration of the stage, there's no way to replace that. And then also the moment of connecting with an audience.
Yeah, the shared experience. I mean, you know, it's great that some bands have figured out the Twitch thing. You know, they're performing live and it's a thing, but it's not the thing. Everybody knows that. But it is what it is. You know, we just got to tough it out for another few months, I think, and then and I think it's going to get a lot better. So, you know, we've been through worse.
Bryan Beller, you're the best, man. I really appreciate you.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
You know, I want to tell a little tale about you, which is that when our dear friend and amazing artist, bassist Dethklok was in his final days, Keneally-Bendian-Lunn, our trio with Mike Keneally, played at Alva's in Pedro, right? And Bryan Beller was there, and I will never forget Bryan Beller freaking out over Dethklok and going up to Doug and giving him mad respect, and it really touched me, and I still think of it.
There was an amazing composition that he wrote. It was right. There was one song in particular that I completely lost my shit over, and
I think that was
that yours?
The one for my dad?
Yes. Holy God, that was amazing. That's why I forgot about that. By the way, don't cut it off yet. I want to show you something. This is Doug's fretted.
Oh, wow.
This now. I talked to, wow, what an image this is. I talked to, well, actually what happened was that Vida, Doug's widow, reached out to me because she didn't have Mike Keneally's information. And she said, you know, I've got these two basses here, and they're just sitting here, and they shouldn't be just sitting here. And, you know, would you talk to Mike, and maybe you guys can like figure out what to do with them, and because they should be played. And so I called Mike, and I was like, you're not going to believe this, but you know, he just called me, and she's got, you know, the two Zons, the fretted 5 and the fretless 5, the one that he played on everything.
Everything.
She she wants us to do something with them. So I talked to her and her daughter, and went over to the house in Santa Monica, and picked them up. And Mike and I, we talked about it, and we agreed that he should have the fretless, because it's on some of that. It's all that classic stuff that he has, and you don't really want to hear me play fretless anyway. And then I would take the fretted, and it's actually a great instrument. It's so cool. I've used it on a couple recordings already. It's got that kind of dark woolly tone, you know, that Doug had. Of course, my hands are not his hands. It's a completely different thing. But yeah, so I have this. So talking about Doug, I mean, part of Doug lives here.
That means so much to me. That's so wonderful. He was such an incredible collaborator and beautiful player. If you want to hear Doug Lunn with me and Mike Keneally on Scambot 2, there are 3 tracks of that trio.
Yeah.
Where Doug multi-tracked bass parts, both doubling things on fretless and fretted. I mean, it was just, there's massive bass on those tracks.
Yeah, just absolutely amazing work. And, you know, I mean, I remember being, you know, I got to go in just a second, but I remember being in the earliest times of Keneally, listening to Doug's work on Boil That Dust Speck, listening to Aglow, and listening to Blameless, and, you know, just that beautiful, you know, fluid, smooth, dark tone that he got on, which is amazing. So yeah.
We did Blameless.
Brought that up.
Blameless we did with the trio with Mike.
Yeah, I think I remember that. Yeah.
And just being able to hang with Doug on that. It's so good to connect the two of you guys and to see that connection is going on. That's just great. And I know the Keneally track that I'm on, for his next thing, he's putting the fretless Doug bass on the track.
Yeah. Well, the typical Keneally is a great thing to end on. When I brought the bass to him, he was in a studio recording, and I just handed it to him. It was in a studio somewhere in North San Diego County, and I just handed it to him. And he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna start using this right now." And like he was making music with it like within 15 minutes of having it, you know.
Well, he played it on the Alva show. When Doug played drums, Mike played bass, and I played piano.
I see what you're saying.
So he had seen that, you know, he had felt that bass a few times before. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's so great.
Well, this is great. I'm glad this is a great way to kind of wrap it up here. And I really treasure this instrument. Doug was an amazing player, and I'm sure he's in that. From somewhere up in those purple virtual clouds.
He's in the vibration now.
Yeah.
Well, folks, thank you to Bryan Beller. It's been such a pleasure, and we've got a lot more stuff coming in 2021. This will be our last one. We're going to take Christmas and New Year's off, but we will see you in 2021. Please like and subscribe to us, and we'll keep doing these. And I can say that we are looking to have a member of Gentle Giant for our premiere episode in January. So looking forward to that. And thank you, Bryan Beller, and everybody, thank you for listening.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone out there.
Thanks, brother.
See you soon.